I can't tell you how important I think this is, that when you're in the midst of this, that you actually keep focused on what really gives your life value and meaning and protect that. Because everything is making you focus on the material problems, the financial difficulties and the practical disorders. And there's so much, I've had a bit of understanding about all the problems here and how slow it's happening, how long it takes to get even, an inspection to know whether you can do anything. Is this right, in this area too? And I want to explain a bit about how that affects us and the kind of state people go into to kind of cope with this. But I want to start by saying, I think the most important thing is to keep the focus on what makes life precious and meaningful. The things that you cannot replace if you lose them. Your marriage, your relationship with your children, your career, your recreational pursuits, hobbies, enjoyments, your social networks, all of these things that make life worthwhile. Because what's going to happen is that you're going to have to actually neglect them in order to deal with the problems. Now, this is one of the difficulties in people outside the area getting it. We have these gum trees that fall down all the time. And I said, just imagine a gum tree falls down tonight and completely demolishes your bathroom, and you have to now replace your bathroom starting tomorrow, because you can't go long without a bathroom, can you? Have you got time in your life to do that? Have you got spare time, not to mention money and skills, And actually most people don't. Their lives are already full up, aren't they? Most of our lives are full with all sorts of interesting things. So I said, okay, well, if you're going, I remember with one bloke I said, okay, but you have to rebuild your bathroom, so what are you going to drop? And he said, well, the first thing I dropped was my golf on Saturday afternoons. Oh yeah, he shouldn't be playing golf anyway because there's so much to do. But okay, he's dropping his golf. But can you see now, what he's going to drop now is systematically all the things that give him enjoyment, happiness, creativity, the social networking, the sense of belonging, the visiting nature, all the things that give energy, he's going to start dropping away, and then put that to make the room for the bathroom. And if we then exaggerate this to the whole of your house and property, and then we slow it all down with the bureaucracies and the logistics and all the, so that you can't actually get on with it for a long time and you have to live in this middle of this problem, then we have to keep asking, so what are you actually not doing that you used to do in your full life in order to make the space available? The time, the energy, the emotional engagement, what are you actually dropping? Well, it's going to be pretty about everything, isn't it? Everything that isn't actually performing some important survival need. Then your life's going to become very narrow and lacking in joy, isn't it? It's going to become very sort of, what's the word, Puritan life, Spartan, just the bare bones of things, just work all the time. Is that right? Is that happening here? And we drift into it. And things fall away, friends move on, relationships change. She said, look, she had a 14-year-old daughter and a 7-year-old son. Lost everything, the house completely demolished. But the house next door, which was owned by a couple that were a bit older than them, whose kids had sort of left home and gone off, their house was untouched. And so they said, helpfully, why don't you move in with us? Seemed like a good idea at the time. They move in, and it's okay. It's pretty hard to know what to do the day after a disaster when you've lost everything. You don't even know where you're going to sleep that night. So it's a really, valuable contribution. But after a couple of weeks, she said to the woman, "Look, thanks very much. You've been really kind, but I think we'll get a caravan on our block like everyone else, and don't be ridiculous," says this lady. I call her Mrs. Do-Gooder. Don't be ridiculous. You've got hot and cold running water. You've got all the facilities. No, this is ridiculous. No, you should stay here. And to cut a long story short, about 3 times over the next few months, she said, I would be getting so tense. I needed my own space, my own kitchen, needed a place where I could yell at the kids, have fights with my husband, because you don't do that when you're in the neighbours, or do you do that with the neighbours? When I'm actually training people, I won't ask you these questions because some of you might be neighbours, but when I'm training people in Victoria, I say, just stop and think for a moment. How do you like to spend the next 18 months living with the neighbour on your left? I don't think I've ever come across any. No, I can remember one person who actually had a neighbour on the left that they wouldn't mind living with for 18 months. But in my experience, it's very rare. I've never had one that I would like to live with. Okay people, sometimes. But I wouldn't want to live with them. They're different. We don't choose our neighbours, do we? And you make a lot of subtle changes in the way you live if you're actually with people that aren't family, so to speak. And she said, so this Mrs. Do-Gooder overrides her. And she said, at about the 6-month mark, I was really going crazy. So I said to my husband, order the caravan to be delivered at 9 o'clock on Saturday morning. We'll tell them at breakfast they won't be able to do anything at all. So at breakfast, thanks very much, you've been wonderful. We don't want to inconvenience you any longer. We've already imposed upon you too much, and all those sort of nice things we say. But Mrs. Do-Gooder said, don't be ridiculous. We've got plenty of room. We've got hot and cold running. No, we won't hear it. Absolutely no, we won't hear of it. Where are you getting the caravan from? Ring them up, Harry, and cancel them, she says to her husband. And he rings it up and cancels it. And they stay there until their house is built. Why can't they actually say what they want? Why do they get overruled? It's a really important question. Do you ever find that in this process you're not quite clear about what you actually want, or what's the right thing to do, or should you do this or that? This is a really important point, because what you lose when you lose your house and your community and the normality is you lose the frame of reference that helps you evaluate and make decisions and judgments. Is this good or bad? Is this going to help me or be a problem? How do I see further ahead? Because we're plunged into the present moment trying to survive very simple problems. Is my house going to fall down? Or you have all the additional earthquakes and so on. So you keep going into this emergency state. And it's very hard to actually stop and think and then really assert what you need. So they'll stay there until their house is built. 18 months or so, I think it took them. And that's going pretty well. The statistics from our bushfires are that after about 2 years, 40% of people have either started rebuilding, a few have rebuilt, but have either started rebuilding or at least got all the approvals and sort of got the contracts ready and ready to go. Only 40%. And that's for a bushfire where it's all and ready to go again, as opposed to all your complications. So it's still a very protracted period. But she said, at that time, before the fire, we were doing well. But now, my husband and I are still together, but we're just good friends. You see, now, that's not a psychiatric illness, is it? But it's what I call degraded quality of life. They've actually lost their marriage and they've got a friendship. That's a very big loss. You know, it happens anyway when things don't go well. But they lost it because they had to perform like friends for 18 months. I'm really using these as pictures to really hold up and say, look, this is actually what is so important to take care of during the recovery period. And those of you who've got children or children at home, it's very important to keep an eye on their development, because 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years is actually, the older we get, the shorter that seems to be, doesn't it? There's a few old folks here, like me. It doesn't seem, a year's not very long, is it, at our age? But for a child, you know, a 7-year-old child, it's double their age. It's, you know, for a teenager, you know, kids who are 12 or 13 when it happens, 3 or 4 or 5 years later, they've gone actually through one of the most important periods of their adolescence. And the question is, has the family been available for them to help them and sort of nurture them through it? You know, I think it's terribly important that we can't postpone the important things. And what I want to do with these stories is to really broaden the picture out. Now, by this stage, you're probably feeling really depressed, are you? How can we possibly do all that when we've got all these problems? The mechanism of adrenaline is designed to deal with an external threat, right? Someone running at you with a large piece of wood, or a saber-toothed tiger chasing you across a glacier in the last ice age. And the people who went into the best, quickest reaction in those ancient times to physical response didn't get eaten, did they? And just simply focus and said, that tree, that branch, that's the one, if I get there, I'll be right. Whereas people were like me who were running along with a gammy leg and saying, damn these bloody saber-toothed tigers, we're going to have to do something about them, right? We can't go on like this. I'm not focused enough, am I? And I'm going to get eaten. And so what we've got is this sort of hair trigger mechanism that puts us into survival mode, but for a physical problem. Now that's great when the masonry's falling, but actually a lot of the problems, a lot of the threats that follow in our civilization, and we try to make civilization like this, are social, financial, you know, and things of that sort, aren't they? And we can't resolve them by grabbing a large piece of wood and hitting somebody. Although you'd like to do that, wouldn't you, with the insurance company and the bureaucrats? So there's a discrepancy once we get down the track. Now, what I want to emphasise is this is highly functional at the time, because this is the state of mind that people are in when they do heroic things. But in order to do that, you have to shut down the feedback loop that is constantly telling us how we are. And you get a great advantage. But if you can't re-engage the feedback loop, then what happens on adrenaline is that the risk is that people are unaware of how much fatigue they are developing because they're just going. And what does an adrenaline person say if you go up to them and say, hey, you've been working for a long time, you're looking incredibly stressed and exhausted, I think you're going to fall over in a minute, why don't you take a rest? What are you going to say?
I'm fine.
Yeah, you're probably going to say in 4-letter words, please go away and leave me alone, I've got a lot of work to do. You are part of the problem, aren't they? Only they'll probably use 2 words. Because in actual fact, what you're trying to do is re-engage the feedback loop, which is the last thing they want. We don't want to know how we feel because we've got a problem out there and it's absolutely humongous and we've got to deal with it. Can you see how this starts to get us into the state where we can't make a good decision about whether we get a caravan or not?